What's going on, traders? So I wasn't going to make a video today simply because there wasn't much to talk about, but we're going to get into the charts, of course, and the main point of this video is to remind you guys of a very key thing that I always try to bring up when it comes to events coming up, such as CPI, FOMC meeting, Jerome Powell speaking. This week we have rate cuts coming in on September 18th. And so, one thing I want to remind you guys of that I always try my best to mention on this channel is that usually the initial move is the wrong move. What do I mean by that? We see this all the time where the market tends to rally into Jerome Powell, whether it's FOMC, whether it's CPI, the market more likely prices in whatever news we're about to get. And then usually that move ends up being the wrong move. And so, to put it simple, if we are bullish heading into this event, if we are continuing to go higher, which it looks like that's going to happen, we're going to get into that a bit on how much higher we can go from here. But usually, when we are bullish heading into this event and the day of the event, and Jerome, let's say Jerome Powell says whatever he has to say, we get 25 basis points, we get 50, whatever the case may be, whatever he announces, whatever move that happened before that announcement is usually the wrong move. So if we're bullish before the announcement, there might be a chance that we end up selling off the next day. Now, this isn't like 100% guaranteed. You're free to look back and see how often this happens on FOMC meetings or when Jerome Powell speaks. Usually everybody's like, "Oh, that was great news. He gave us some dovish news," and then suddenly you see some type of sell off the next day. And obviously the opposite can happen. Now, we're still on Monday. It's not, we still got 2 more days left, or a day and a half more or less left, and we could absolutely see some type of sell off tomorrow, right? I don't necessarily think we're going to see any type of sell off tomorrow. I do think there is potential to go higher. And so right now we're looking at the NQ daily time frame. And I could be wrong about this, but usually most of the time you're free to look back. Majority of the time you see on when the NQ, the ES, they gap up, you usually continue further up. So right here, for example, will be a good example. Now this isn't the greatest example, but even down here you see a gap up and then you continue to go higher, right? And you continue to go higher for a pretty decent amount of time. But right here, you have one of those rare cases where you immediately just pretty much sell off and then you continue to go higher, right? But what's important to note here is that when we leave gaps behind on the NQ and ES, whenever we go to fill them, it's a very, very dramatic move. What do I mean by that? So right here, we didn't necessarily fill this gap, right? We kind of left it still open. We left a little bit more open. And then when we finally did decide to fill the gap, we sold off very dramatically, all the way to the point where we started to fill this gap all the way down here as well. Right here is another great example. Now, I would consider this a fair value gap, but we'll just call it a gap, just to save trouble. But we broke down, we left this gap open, and then look what happens. We dramatically filled the gap up. Okay. And once we filled the gap up, we just kept going, which is usually the case when it comes to the NQ and the ES. Whenever we leave a gap open, we go to fill it, we tend to continue in that direction. So right now, I told you guys about this yesterday where we're at these very critical areas and we just pretty much ignored them. We just gapped up. But what's more important here is that we're still leaving fair value gaps behind as well. So I don't necessarily, by all means, make your money to the upside. We're trading the upside as while it's here, of course, in the Discord. But I urge caution heading into this event. I urge caution when we are talking about this rate cut news because we're leaving a lot of space open to the downside. We've continued to go up. We haven't really seen that staircase scenario. Today was more so of a consolidation, but in my opinion, we didn't really get much. I mean, today was consolidation, but in my opinion, I still think this is a pretty unhealthy move when we're talking about 3, 4 days in a row where we're just continuously seeing upside. And you guys know one of my mottos is, or the overall market pretty much says this: elevator down, staircase up. And right now, I mean, we're not seeing much of a staircase up. We're seeing that bulls are in full control right now, but again, we're leaving a lot of space open to the downside. We're leaving not only fair value gaps, but now we're leaving gaps open. And so that leads me to believe that either the last few weeks of September is going to be very bearish, or we're going to be looking at a very bearish October. And which is pretty normal because October is notoriously bearish heading into election. especially for election years. I will say that much. So usually October is bearish, and then November, December, we get actual bullish movement in the market. So I imagine, if anything, if we were to see a sell-off, even if it doesn't happen after the actual news, maybe it's not a buy the rumor, sell the news, or maybe it will be a sell the news delay type of deal where maybe we don't see the actual sell the news until a few days later. Whatever the case may be, regardless, I do think that the last at least few weeks of September, we're going to see a major sell-off if we continue in this type of direction. So we look at the ES, and in my last video, I told you guys that if the ES gets above 5630, then it's most likely going to head towards 5700. And we got there a lot sooner than I expected. I honestly thought it would at least take a day or two, or even the Fed rate cut news would pretty much cause that to happen. But as you guys can see, we have us a symmetrical triangle here. We rejected here, we rejected here. We didn't even reject here. We just gapped up out of the symmetrical triangle. We bounced here, we bounced here. But again, we're leaving not only a gap to the downside open, and by all means, we could just start filling this tomorrow, just get it out the way, where we see one of these moves like this, where we just retest tomorrow, and maybe Fed rate, the rate cut news comes in, and then we just bounce higher. Okay, but another scenario here is that bulls can get trapped. And so this is why I'm urging caution here. Now, me personally, I do think we're going to head higher tomorrow. I can be wrong. I may be too early to even call that. Maybe we see some type of downside tomorrow, where this all happens in one day, where we see downside, we retest, and then we start to head higher. So I would look for a retest of 5640, 5645, somewhere around that range. And then if we start to bounce, then chances are we're going to head higher, and we're going to be looking at a move towards 5800. Highest I'm looking at is 5900. Now, I did say that bulls could get trapped here, right? And what I mean by that is that, again, like I said on the NQ, we left a fair value gap open to the downside. And not only did we leave a fair value gap, but we left the gap open. So if we are looking at a bull trap here, because this candle here, let's actually get rid of this here. Because this candle here is really not telling us much. It's pretty sure we gapped up, but it's very indecisive. It looks like it's very indecisive heading into tomorrow. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised we do get a sell off tomorrow. I'm not counting on it, but I want to get into the possibilities of a sell off and what's really showing signs that we are looking at a sell off very soon. And so if we do just so happen to bull trap, then I imagine if we roll back into this pattern, roll back into the symmetrical triangle, you guys know anytime we roll back into a pattern, we tend to continue in that direction. So if we roll back into this symmetrical triangle, then chances are we're going to continue in the direction, and we're going to start heading towards this fair value gap all the way at 5,500. Okay. But right now, as long as we stay outside the symmetrical triangle, even if we just so happen to retest and bounce off of it, my targets is 5,800. Highest I'm looking at is 5,900. Honestly, I mean, we might as well just throw 6,000 out there on the table as well. And so, in regards to NQ, I didn't mention my target, but if we are going to continue higher as in regards to the NQ, because we do have this fair value gap here. I don't know if you guys can see this. Let's actually move all this stuff out the way. But if we are looking to go higher on the NQ, then I imagine we're going to head towards this fair value gap at around 20,200 and pretty much mitigate it, get it out the way, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. And then at that point, I do imagine triple Qs is going to be filling that gap at around the 490s, which we're going to talk about right now. But again, I'm not too confident in this candle right here. I mean, we gapped up, sure, but I'm just not liking just how indecisive it looks and just how small it is. Okay, maybe we just jump up overnight and it gets bigger, because I mean, the day isn't over in regards to the futures. But if this is a bull trap, then that would be pretty bad, and I imagine we're just going to start mitigating this fair value gap. So be careful right here. Really see how tomorrow plays out. Again, I still think we're going to see more upside, but just be careful. Wait for confirmation. Don't take my word. Do your own TA. Do your own due diligence. Okay, so let's look at the SPY real quick. And so the SPY is pretty much in the same spot, which is very interesting considering the futures and where they are. Okay, the futures gapped up, but we didn't really get much of a reaction in regards to the SPY and the triple Qs. And you guys know, um, I'm not full blown bullish, or I'm not really talking about my 580 target or my 600 target until we break above 565 on the spot. Okay, it's really 564, but you guys know we talk about psych levels here, so 565 will be my safe target to break in regards to the upside. But as you guys can see, we zoom out a little bit so you guys can get like a better picture of how this looks. We have us a symmetrical triangle. Okay, so we have a bounce here, we have a bounce here, and then we have a flat top here. Now, again, like I said in the last video, you can argue that this is a potential triple top, but it's not yet confirmed. The ascending triangle is not confirmed as well, but the ascending triangle is a bullish pattern in case you don't know. And if we are considering this to be a possible triple top, then that's a bearish pattern. But the neckline isn't clear for me. I guess you can call this trend line the neckline if we are talking about a triple top. But for me, I just prefer my triple tops, triple bottoms, double tops, double bottoms to have like a pretty much flat neckline. Okay, that's just my preference. I'm not saying if you go by the trend, you're wrong. It's just more so of a preference type of deal when it comes to how I trade. And so again, the SPY is showing. I mean, if we're talking about the ES and where it is and just how it broke out of that symmetrical triangle, which is bullish or signs of being bullish, and I told you guys again that if the ES gets above 5630, then we're heading to 5700. We did it in a day. And if we're assuming that the ES is bullish, then we have to assume that most likely the SPY is going to break out of this pattern here. Now, if we don't break out of here tomorrow, or even Wednesday morning, and we just consolidate in here, or not even consolidate, we just start seeing some type of sell off, I do think that's good. Okay, I do think that's a good sign in regards to heading to rate cuts. If we just start selling off tomorrow and Wednesday, and we pretty much retest the bottom of this ascending triangle and pretty much mitigate these two fair value gaps to the downside, I honestly think that's a good sign. Now, and then we just pretty much retest or bounce back and forth in here until we get that rate cut news and then possibly get good news and then we break higher. Now, if we get bad news and we just continue within this range despite where the ES is, then we could be heading towards this fair value gap all the way down to 537, 535 range. So again, I still think we're going to see more upside. If we are, if we're assuming that the ES is gapping up, well, we're not assuming. We can obviously see the ES gapping up, but we will say that there is potential for the SPY to gap up tomorrow as well. But we'll have to see. We'll just have to wait and see. Wait 30 minutes into open, and we'll see. Triple Qs. So triple Qs. So this was an arrow I left from my last video. If you're new to the channel, this isn't necessarily telling anything, but like just like the SPY, we saw the NQ gap up, we saw the ES gap up, but we're still in the same spots in regards to the triple Qs and the SPY. And so could we gap up is the question here, and I think it's very much possible. I find it hard to imagine that after all this, we just don't head up here and just start mitigating this area up here all the way at 492. It's also important to note that we have a gap open here as well. And so if we are going to mitigate this area, I don't necessarily think, I mean, we can go as high as about 496, I would imagine. You guys know my all-time high targets for this year in regards to the triple Qs is 510. We got pretty close. We got to 503. So I was $7 off, but I still think 510 is on the table, and I still think that's very much possible. But if this is a bear trap, I mean not a bear trap, but a bull trap, because we talked about that when we were looking at the NQ and the ES. This could be a sign of a bull trap, given that the triple Qs hasn't broken out. We had the ES breakout, we had the NQ breakout. They both gapped up, but the triple Qs, and this is why it's important to look at both the futures and the ETFs because you get some type of because you want to see some type of correlation. And right now they're not in sync. You have one gapping up, well, you have the futures gapping up, and then you have ETFs pretty much just stagnating and not going anywhere. So could this be a bull trap? Is pretty much what I'm saying here because we're still at these key levels that we even talked about in the last video. We still haven't broken out. And if we just so happen to reject from here, just like I said for the SPY, if we reject from that area and we just pretty much bounce within that ascending triangle, it is a good sign in my opinion. I think that will be a good sign because if we just continue to hold this fair value gap at around the 460s. Okay, so if we start selling off tomorrow and heading into Wednesday, I think that's a good sign. And it all goes back to what I was saying about the first move or the initial move is usually the wrong move heading into an event. So it would be, again, it would be a good sign. If you are bullish, I think this sell off before the event is a good sign. But if we continue to break out and we start, continue to go higher into this event, I think that's a bad sign if you are looking to be pretty much, I guess, for lack of better wording, long-term bullish. Okay, so that's my thought process there. So there's a fair value gap all the way down to the 460s, and then there's a fair value gap that needs to be mitigated all the way into the 490s range. So the time will tell, but it really kind of bugs me that the ES is, gapping up, the NQ is gapping up, but we haven't really seen anything from the ETFs. Maybe they're just delayed. That happens. That obviously happens where one is always delayed after the other. So that could be the case. But I would just be very cautious heading into the rest of this week, or at least heading into Wednesday. And so a stock that's really giving signals that we could be looking at a sell off soon. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, tomorrow, whatever the case may be. Is Apple. And so I've been saying this in the Discord. I even mentioned this in the video, another video where we're constantly seeing Apple trying to break down. Like we see Apple is really trying to break down. We see that bad news is being pumped out in regards to Apple's iPhone sales and all of that, which I don't think anyone's surprised. I mean, Apple is just failing to be innovative at all with its iPhones. Um, I always thought Androids was superior. Comment your thoughts below on that. We can have a little um, debate about which phone is better, but regardless, I've always thought Apple was just failing or lacking in being innovative in comparison to Androids. Okay, I always thought Androids was superior, but you're just seeing the decline in sales across the board in regards to Apple. And so right now, Apple just really doesn't have nothing going for itself. Now, obviously, news can pop up overnight. I wouldn't be surprised that does happen. And if we are going to pump higher tomorrow and heading into Wednesday, then I do imagine that Apple is just going to fill this gap up at around 522, 523. I'm not five, 222, 223 range, and then we start seeing a further breakdown towards 210, 205 range. Okay, because right now Apple doesn't have a reason to pump higher outside of the market, but we're constantly seeing, and I've said this over and over, where we're constantly seeing Apple just constantly reject this fair value gap up here. It just doesn't want to break higher than it. It doesn't want to really mitigate it. It just pretty much is just constantly rejecting this area right here. Okay, so Apple has constantly shown that it is not trying to go higher. The market is holding it higher. Okay, the market is pretty much holding it hostage, or at least the tech side of the market is pretty much holding Apple hostage, and Apple is showing signs that it wants to drop. So what I'm getting at is that if Apple wants to drop further down, which I genuinely think it does, I think it's on the market, and I think it's waiting on that market sell off to happen. Okay, I think Apple is showing signs that a sell off is near. Okay, that's just my opinion, but I mean, if you do the math, you're constantly seeing Apple reject. It's failing to break higher. It's continued to fail to even break higher up here in this area here. 522, I mean 222 is really having a hard time. It just could not get anything done. Okay, and then eventually it just rejected. We got our news in regards to the iPhone sales and whatever else, and then it finally gapped down. But even when it gapped down, it tried to drag the market down with it, but the market fought back, bulls fought back, and it continued to hold. The market just continues to hold Apple hostage. But I've been saying this over and over in the Discord, because members are always asking about Apple and our Apple puts, which are pretty much close to being in profit, by the way. That I do think Apple is going to continue to head lower. Sure, we can get a dead cat bounce. And I wouldn't even call it a dead cat bounce, but a retest. The market just carries it a little higher. We get one more retest, fill this gap up, and then boom, we break down on Apple. Until good news comes out on Apple, which is very much possible to happen overnight. Maybe they push out some unicorn news out the sky. I'm just not seeing any bullish potential for Apple. It's also important to note because when we're talking about fair value gaps, anytime you break above a fair value gap, that's bullish. Anytime you break below a fair value gap, that is bearish. So I'm glad to see a lot of traders, especially Discord members, who really get into fair value gaps. I'm glad everyone's seeing the power behind fair value gaps. Eventually, institutions are probably going to catch on. They're going to be like, they're going to find something new or a new way to pretty much, you know, trap us and make fair value gaps obsolete. But we'll have to see what happens from there. But I'm really glad everyone is liking fair value gaps. I'm clearly seeing more and more traders use it. I don't know if it's thanks to my channel, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more traders use it. So we'll see. But That's really all I don't, that's not all I have. I actually want to talk about Nvidia here. And I forgot to mention this last video. So Nvidia was in an interesting spot here. So we're looking at the weekly time frame here for Nvidia, and you guys clearly see it where we are at a weekly fair value gap on Nvidia. And this is what I want to mention in the last video here. Now, I will say that this pattern right here is a very bullish pattern. So let's actually look at it right here. So this is a piercing line pattern, which is a very bullish pattern. I would say it's more bullish in a downtrend, but regardless, if it looks like the pattern, assume that it is until proven otherwise. So this is a bullish pattern. Okay, this you can call it an engulfing pattern, whatever case may be, but this is a piercing line pattern. It's a bullish pattern. But right now we are at a weekly fair value gap, so it's pretty much keeping this pattern from playing out. And as you guys can see, we pretty much opened up in pretty much the middle of this pattern, and we just closed on the day as a doji. So I was not closed on the day. This is a weekly time frame, so the week isn't over. But again, we're at this fair value gap. We need to really break above it. I would say above 123 for us to really start heading higher on Nvidia, and we'll start looking at a move to 125, 130, and so on and so forth. So that's really what I had for Nvidia. I'm not super bullish on it. I'm not super bearish on it. It's just in a weird spot right now. We'll just have to see how the week goes. But if we go down to the daily time frame, if us closing below 117 is pretty bearish, I will say that much. But if we are pretty much closing below 117, I would just say I wouldn't so much worry about it because we could just simply be heading towards that retest to 110 and then possibly just bounce higher. Okay. That is possible. I don't think this is like the end of Nvidia. I don't think we're going to see the 90s just yet. Maybe rate cut news causes that, but if we are breaking down because we broke below 117, I do imagine that we're going to head towards that retest of 110, mitigate this fair value gap, and then possibly start to head higher from there. So we'll see. But other than that, that's really all I have for this video, guys. I don't really have much to talk about. I just want to give you guys some key things to think about. Just be careful. I'm trying my best to be cautious. But if you want to join the Discord link is in the description below. You want to see how I'm trading these, trading rate cut news and all that fun stuff. We finally closed our TLT play. We took profit on our TLT play, so that was a good thing. I think TLT is going to continue to head higher. I think it can go as high as about 110, 115. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 120, but unfortunately, our contract is expired this week, so we couldn't hold it much longer. But we got into TLT at around 95 and TLT is currently at like 101. I definitely think TLT is going to head higher. Yeah, it's at 101.33. We closed our play at around 140, somewhere around there. We took profit on it. I definitely think TLT is going to head higher. We also got shares in TLT. I alerted to get shares in TLT. We have a long-term portfolio in the Discord for investment, long-term investment, retirements, all that fun stuff. So adding a lot of great things. In the Discord. If you want access to our AI bots, they alert trades as well. They're very accurate. Discord members really love the AI bots. I love the AI bots. They're very very accurate in my opinion. Um, it's pretty much a war between me and the AI bots. We're pretty much going head to head right now. They might be winning. Who knows? But regardless, that's all I have for this video, traders. Um, until the next video, traders. Have a good one.